So beginning at a young age, our children are being taught damaging misinformation about sexuality, gender identity, and human biology. So how can parents raise their children to understand and value God's design? Hillary Morgan Ferrer is a best-selling author, and she's founder of Mama Bear Apologetics. In this podcast, Hillary will address parents, help them to understand God's design for sexuality, and identify tactics that are being used to trick our children into adopting unbiblical views. She's also going to help us teach our children to treat those who hold to different views with a Christ-like compassion without compromising biblical values. And Hillary gets real about her personal life challenges. So here's my conversation with Hillary Morgan Ferrer. Well, Hillary, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
My daughter-in-law is a huge fan of yours. She introduced me to your books.
Yay.
So she's jealous that I get to talk to you.
Well, that's so cool. Tell her thank you for passing the information along.
Hillary is the founder and president of Mama Bear Apologetics. Mama Bear is a great ministry for busy moms. Hillary is also a best-selling author, and I encourage you to check out her books. There are many of them, and your new book, Honest Prayers for Mama Bears. Congratulations on the new book.
Thank you. That one just came out yesterday.
Hillary has her undergrad degree from Texas Christian University, TCU, the Horned Frogs.
Go Frogs!
You have a lot of experiences in a lot of things, and God has taken you through some health issues as well. So if you wouldn't mind, talk about some of the things God, you've had cancer. Talk about what God has been teaching you through that.
Oh, yeah. So my first bout with cancer was back in 2009, 2010. It was my first year teaching. And so I did about 7 months of chemo for that. And that was one of those interesting things where the Lord really ripped away what I saw as being my identity, because part of my identity was always kind of wrapped up in my ability to think well. And they compare chemo brain to pregnancy brain, where I remember when I was on chemo, I couldn't hang in conversations that I would normally hang with. I couldn't read the books that I would normally read, because a lot of times I would read science books, Signature to the Cell, all the Discovery Institute kind of stuff. And it was just like, I kind of was brought back to my love of fiction, maybe even as a child. So I couldn't understand what was going on around me very well, just because your brain is so muddied. But then, so that was kind of right when my husband and I would have been having kids. And so when the Lord kind of brought this idea for Mama Bear Apologetics to my mind, and it was very clearly not something that I thought, oh, I want to do this. I'd never really been involved in women's ministry. I never fit in with a lot of the girls that, from like middle school on up. I just didn't quite fit in the same. And so I thought the Lord was giving me this ministry to pass it on to somebody. So it's like there was this even one night, this kind of week of sleepless nights where I just outlined this entire ministry, because I had a friend tell me that there was an entire demographic of women who wouldn't read something unless it was by women for women. And my mind went completely past, well, who's teaching the women, to, oh my gosh, who's reaching the moms in apologetics, because moms are the ones that get the questions first. So anyway, with all my health problems, since that was right when we would have been having kids, and then just the way that I've had subsequent health problems. I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar with the Whipple procedure, but if you talk to an ICU nurse, Whipple procedure is like up there with, giant open heart surgery, and you don't recover from that. So I actually had that done while I was editing the second book, the one that we're talking about today. And so all of those have really, really humbled me in the sense that I just don't have a lot of energy a lot of times to do what other people can do. And I really never did. I never had the health growing up. It was one of those things where I had special permission to miss more school than everybody else, because I was still such a good student. But now it's just, I can't really attribute anything I've done to just, my tenacity and my stick with it, nature. It really is the Lord has gone before me. And so there's been things I've had to give up on. And I say, what, if he's called me to it, he'll give me energy for it. And then there's been things where I just don't have energy for it, where I had to step away from a period of time. I had to step away completely from the podcast for a period of time, because every time I got on there, it's like, I would just get so exhausted. And even now I have what are called crash days. Well, we call them crash days. It's the days that I can't even get out of bed, and I'll sleep maybe like for 17 hours at a time. But every time the Lord has me traveling to speak somewhere, he is so faithful to give me the energy and give me the words and give me the everything that I need in that moment, to where I do not stress like I used to about having to have everything perfect before I went out there. I know the Lord's going to show up. The Lord's going to show up. He has to. If he didn't show up, I would not be able to do what I'm doing. And it's built like an entire different level to my faith than I had before, because I absolutely know I've been taken to the very end of myself. And I just have to have faith that he's going to show up. So, when I was confused about why I was starting Mama Bear, I kind of felt the Lord saying that I had something that most women didn't have, and most moms don't have, and that's time to research. So the Lord, I kind of feel like this is my way of being a mom, that if I can equip the moms that are out there, and the dads too, our books are really good for either. I mean, it's not like it's proprietary. You just got to make it through a couple mom jokes. But I've had pastors say they've, preached on our book, using our books, whole sermon series. So it's good information. But the Lord has really specifically called me to that demographic. Yeah, it was weird. It was like overnight, I was just obsessed with moms and wanting to equip them.
So we're going to talk about how the sex talk has changed. All right. My wife, Lori, and I have 4 children, 3 girls and 1 boy. And so Lori got the girls to tell them the sex talk. And Garrison, he did one of those, or was it Bring Your Child to Work Day or whatever?
Yeah.
He came with me, and during lunch we had our talk. And he never did go to work with your dad day again.
He's
said,
like, those are awkward. Is everybody else's day as awkward as mine was?
Oh my goodness. So the sex talk has changed. Talk about how has it changed? We've got a lot of stuff going on in our world
my
today.
Goodness. Yeah. So the sex talk has really changed. It used to be, basic mechanics. We'll just say it was the basic mechanics, what goes where, what's happening. And that's awkward enough. But then also just bringing in the Christian aspect of it, of being able to say, well, this is something God specifically created good, and he created it for marriage. And I think a lot of people's kind of, the talk really ended with that. All they got was, this is what sex is, and don't do it. And that's all they got, but they don't understand the rich theological nature of the act of sex. But I think the way that it's really changed over time is that anything outside of a kind of biblical man and woman in marriage, it was considered sinful, and everybody knew that. Even in the terminology, even the kids that were partiers, it's like they kind of reveled in being the bad kids, and you were called a goody-goody if you didn't engage in that stuff. That right there tells you that culture had an understanding of what was good. And we don't have that anymore. It's at the point where what is good is being called evil, and what is evil is being called good, to where now we're having Christian kids that are saying, being told, if you don't affirm everything about me, if you don't affirm X, Y, and Z, then you are hating me, you are harming me, and your God says love. Your God says they will know you're a Christian. They know enough of scripture to say they will know you are Christians by your love. So why aren't you loving me like Jesus did? And it's like, to be called a goody-goody is completely different than being called a hateful, hurtful, abusive monster who's causing people to commit suicide. Can we just take a second and realize those are so completely different levels of peer pressure that our kids are having to face right now? And so what we're having to do is explain why God's good design is in fact good. And not only is it good, but it's what really some of the buzzwords you'll hear is like human flourishing, what causes people to flourish and what harms people. That we're in this age where things that actually harm people, they're considered, well, that's what I prefer, or that's what I think flourishing is. It's because we don't have this concept of what is a human, who is God, what were we created for, who's the authority, who gets to say on what my purpose is. And instead we've taken, just this really almost like comic book version of what is my identity and stripped it from all these rich layers of, of intellect and heart and interest and styles and all these different things. And we've taken to where the whole of my identity can be captured by who I prefer to have sex with. Like that's such a shallow view of humankind. And so being able to prepare kids not only for being able to be called those names, but I've even talked to just boys and stuff that it used to be the boys we were saying, you're the ones that need to, calm the heck down, but now we've got these Christian boys that are wanting to honor God with their body, and they're having girls send them pictures that they should not be sending them. And what does a boy do when it's like everything in his body is desiring? I mean, it's hard enough battle fighting with your own biology. It is an extra hard battle when you're fighting with your biology and the girls are openly offering themselves to you. The level of temptation with that is still just, I can't even imagine what the guys are going through. So being able to be prepared not only in the knowledge of what sexuality is, why God designed it the way he did, and then how to walk through it when all of culture says it's no big deal and you're just seeing movies and pictures and we've got a porn culture that we never had when I was growing up. If you wanted to see something, you had to swipe your uncle's magazine from underneath his mattress or something like that, and now it's at their fingertips. It's just a completely different world than what we grew up in.
I want us to get into putting sexuality, the sex talk, into the biblical framework.
Yeah.
But before we do that, talk to parents. So the sex talk is intimidating in the best of times, and now you have the culture you explained. You can't delegate this to a youth pastor. You can't delegate this to a Christian school. It's got to be the parents. I love what you say about discipleship in the home. A couple quotes. A well-trained mind is the biggest spiritual protection against the enemy's schemes. Fantastic. And the most important, one guy says in your book, the most important battlefield is the 6 inches between your ears. It's in your mind. So talk to parents, and just to remind them, your kids are looking to you. They might roll their eyes. They may never want to go to
kids
take your child to work.
I always say it's proof that you're doing something right if they're rolling their eyes, especially if you're being serious about something and not just it's not some stupid dad joke. But like if your kids, especially your teenagers, are rolling their eyes, it's a sign you've done something right. But yeah, so the question being like, how do you do this discipleship in the home? And one of the things that I am very much an advocate for, and a lot of times this comes with people asking me at what age should I begin these talks, is establishing categories very, very early on. Because I think most of our learning as kids are getting older, we're putting things into different categories. So let's talk about in terms of sexuality. The category when I was growing up, I knew that Christianity taught, the category for sex is things that a husband and wife do. But if you looked at the media, it was things that people in a long-term committed relationship did. So that was my category for sex. Even though I knew Christians were different from the world, it was a difference in a long-term committed relationship in marriage versus a long-term committed relationship in dating or, engagement or something like that. Well, culture has since moved past that to where sexuality has been kind of put into this category of things that you do with people who you're in love with. And then it moved even further, things that you do with people who you're dating. And then it moved even further. And now it's like, I won't go through all the steps, but now I don't know if you've noticed this, whenever you watch TV or movies, it's like the moment you realize that you and this person are kind of both attracted to each other, all of a sudden the clothes all start getting ripped off. It's like the second that you realize that you're both interested in each other, that's the category that it's gone into. So first off, knowing that kids are categorizing in this way, but then we can start really young with things like things that are so powerful that they need to be guarded. So it's like anyone who's played the categories games or the game Things. This is a great game to play with kids to get them thinking in terms of categories. So things that are so powerful that they need to be guarded. You might say like, an untrained dog on a leash, and the bigger the dog, the more he needs to be guarded, the more he needs restraints. Or a nuclear bomb, that's a pretty powerful thing. You need to have something that's carefully guarded. Or the more valuable something is, the more we need to guard it. You'll have some, your kindergartner's picture is out on the refrigerator, but the Mona Lisa is behind glass and where you can only get so close. It's because the more valuable something is, the more we guard it. I also like using fire as a good analogy in the sense of things that can be good or bad depending on how they're used. This is another category where fire can be a really, really great thing when it is used correctly. Fire can be a really powerful and really scary thing when it's used incorrectly. So again, these are all the things that we can start preparing our kids to one day when we have the talk. Be like, remember when we talked about things that were so powerful that need to be guarded? That's sex. Remember when we talk about things that are so valuable that they need to be protected? That's you. And that's the person that you're dating. Remember when we talked about things that can create and destroy depending on how they're used? That's also sex. And then the final category that I like kind of putting in people's heads is things that reinforce a promise that was already made. Because this is a category that I wish I had understood when I was younger, is that sex is basically a repeating of the marital vows in bodily form. And so this is what scripturally you would call a covenant renewal ceremony. So if we think about even just the stories that we have with God in the flood, that rainbow is meant to be, every time we see a rainbow, that's a covenant renewal ceremony of the Lord saying, I will never destroy the entire earth through a flood. Or circumcision was meant to be a covenant renewal ceremony that every time they circumcised their children, that was them saying, we are your people. And this is the outward sign that we are your people. It's something that we do physically that is representative of a spiritual truth. And in fact, I would say during my time in my master's in biology, I worshiped more than I ever did. I was in a program for apologetics, and I wasn't able to finish because Mama Bear really took off, and I wasn't able to do both at the same time because of my health. But I worshiped more in my master's in biology than I did with any theological training because I saw what the Lord was pointing to through the physical realm. So if we can get this concept of a physical thing that is pointing back to something spiritual, namely a spiritual promise, you can even start with kids when they're really young of saying, we're going to do this handshake. This handshake means I will never lie to you. Every time we do this special handshake, that's a reminder of the promise that I made, that I will never lie to you, so that when they get older and now it's take your son to work day, remember how we talk, let's do our secret handshake, because right now I'm going to tell you something and I'm not lying to you, and let's do our secret handshake. I'm going to introduce you to something that married people do that is a physical representation and a physical reminder of the vows they made on their wedding day. And once you get that category so cemented in a kid's mind, sex outside of marriage doesn't make sense because you can't point back to a promise that was never made.
This is part of a podcast series for parents. So we're doing just recorded a podcast with a guy for Gen Z. And we talked about sharing the gospel with Gen Z. And it's interesting because he said, you don't start Gen Z like you used to do, right? You're a sinner. You can't save yourself. Jesus died for you. Trust in him by faith.
These things that used to be intuitive that we as humans knew, they're not intuitive anymore. We're told, don't change. You're perfect the way you are.
So now you go back to the beginning. And I love what you say about the sex talk. You don't jump into the sex talk. It's like jumping into the middle of the book, you say. Yes. It starts with understanding God's framework for sexuality. So give us a flyover on that God's framework regarding sexuality.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we're seeing most of all, and if we were to boil the sexuality issue down to one more single issue, it used to be pleasure, right? People wanted pleasure, but they didn't want the commitment. I would say that's not the main issue. The main issue is now authority. The authority of who gets to say what I was created for. Who's the one that says, if I was even created, who's to say what my purpose is? So the fancy theological word for this is the telos. What is my telos? What is the purpose for which I was created? And who gets to tell me that purpose? So it really ultimately comes down to God as creator and God as the authority. Because think about it, even the word author, the author is the one who has authority because they are the one that wrote the story, that wrote the book. They knew what they were intending. And now we're in a time where everybody's saying, I have the right to say who I am. I have the right to say why I was created, what is most fulfilling to me, and what do I think my purpose is. And it's something I have to discover. It's kind of I don't know, you're old enough to remember this with me. City Slickers, if you can find that thing, that one thing, but that's up to you. It's not up to us. It is up to who is our creator. Were we created for a purpose, or were we evolved by random chance? And if we believe that we were created for a purpose, we need to know who that creator is and what that purpose is for which we were created. If we evolved through random chance, then nobody can give us that purpose. Nobody can tell us what we evolved for. It's just what happened. So everything comes back down to this concept of authority.
I'm going to ask you this one because this has been an echo I've been hearing. I was at a thing the other day and I heard it and then I read it, that marriage represents the Trinity in this mysterious relationship that we have. We have Ephesians 5 that talks about, marriage is about Christ and the church. But I couldn't wait to ask you that question. Talk to me about the Trinity and marriage. You got three, you got two, but the same things going on in the components. I
would say within the Trinity, what we have a concept for, if you've ever seen someone do a diagram of the Trinity, it says spirit is not, is God, is not it's like the spirit is not the Father, is not the Son, but is God. And then the Son has, is not the Spirit, is not the Father, but is God. So we have these three persons that are co-equal, equally God, but existing in different roles. And so, but we also see in Scripture, Jesus talking about submitting to the Father. So it's like, I think this again goes back to the concept of authority, that we have so messed up this concept of authority and of submission that we don't even know what that looks like. We hear the word submission and we hear authority and we hear someone who can make you do anything they want you to do, instead of someone who exists completely ontologically equal with you. Ontologically means that just the essence of a person is 100% equal. So within Christianity, we have kind of a debate between what's called the egalitarians and the complementarians within marriage. That the egalitarians say that there's no difference in equality or in role between husband and wife. We're not talking about male and female. We're talking specifically about husband and wife, because there's some kind of crazy kind of complementarians who say that there's a difference between men and women in terms of kind of ontological worth and things like that, and authority, as if all women have to submit to all men, and that's crazy. But so we have the complementarian and the egalitarian. Both of them should theoretically be agreeing that we have absolutely equal worth, that we are all at the same foot, or at the same place before the cross. But we have a picture within the Trinity of what it looks like to say, that Jesus submitted to the Father in certain things, even though they were 100% equal. We don't have any true pictures of that within just the human realm. And I think this is where we can say we are absolutely equal to one another, but at the same time, there is a different role within marriage. And the Trinity is one of the only places you can see that in a healthy way. Because if you get this wrong and you turn God the Father into this kind of taskmaster, or he's the mean one, or he's the one who always gets his way, you're going to have a really messed up view of what you think marriage is. If the man thinks, oh, this is my castle, my kingdom, the buck stops with me there, sweetie, and whatever I say goes. But when you have that, I like how my pastor talks about it. He calls it the circle of love and the dance of love between these completely equal persons within the Trinity. That I would say my husband and my father are such amazing examples of what it looks like to always put my best, or, my dad and my mom, her best before their own, to put their interest above their own, like we see in the Ephesians passage saying that we, husbands, love your wives like you do your own body, and giving yourself up for her. That is exactly also what we see within the Trinity. And again, there's a lot of, when people get the Trinity wrong, they get marriage wrong. And when they get marriage wrong, they get the Trinity wrong. I'm not saying that happens every single time, but I have noticed a correlation. And whenever people are wanting to argue with me about that, I can always say, this view that you have of what authority and submission are, that's a really jacked up view of authority and submission. And so again, I think these two are intertwined. There was an author, Piper. Piper wrote a book called Sex and the Supremacy of Christ that was the first one to really introduce me to this idea that our ability to see God correctly and our ability to understand sexuality were so intricately intertwined that you could not introduce a distortion without distorting the other. If you have a distorted view of God, it will distort your view of sexuality. But likewise, if you start having a distortion in your sexuality, you start having a distorted view of God. And I've seen this happen in real time with people who were strong Christians that basically started breaking away from the biblical sexual ethic and morality. And I've seen their theology degrade from that. So I can't explain how that link is going on. I just know it is. And Piper was the first one that really made me aware of that from that book.
You have a great section in your book on worldview, and you talk about biblical worldview, and you say that a lot of ways to look at worldview through a lenses, filter. But I love what you said about when you look at a puzzle, the front cover of a puzzle shows you what this thing's supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm. That's like ultimate reality right there.
That's it. That's what I got to go for. But then I open the thing up, and there are 1,000 pieces to this. So I love what you talk. So talk about worldview in light of that, putting it all together, puzzle piece.
Yes. So worldview is basically the way you view reality. And so you can break it down in lots of different ways, like, where we're created or where we evolved, or what is the definition of good? What is the definition of evil? What is our problem as humans? And what is the solution? So all these things will contribute to how we see basically the fabric of reality. And the Bible does a really good job with, you have to put all these pieces together to really see what reality it is being portrayed. So an example that I give to when I'm talking, especially with youth, is I have these little dots, and they're kind of like done in the shape of a heart. And I'll say, what shape is that? And they all say, well, that's a heart, because they can see the pattern that the dots make. And I say, which dot makes that a heart? And they're like, well, I guess you kind of have to have all of them. I said, yes, exactly. You have to have all of them. That sometimes people are looking for this like hard, fast verse. This verse says, the biblical worldview is blah, 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 blah. When really you're trying to find the patterns that are within that support different shapes. And so like if we were to put it all together, you'd see the picture of the box top, you'd see ultimate reality. But as children are getting, as they're growing, they're getting pieces one at a time. And they're trying to fit it in to their puzzle. And when sin entered the world, it's like someone dumped a different puzzle in there. So like the biblical worldview would be that God is creator. He is the one who's in authority. And here are his commandments that are meant for our good and for the good of mankind. Well, then you have another box top, with a different puzzle from Satan, saying Satan going, in fact, Satan doesn't even say that he doesn't want himself to be worshipped. He wants you to worship yourself. And he's saying you are the authority. You are the one who can decide. And so the kids are getting all these different pieces going, does this fit in with my puzzle? I'm not sure exactly how this fits in. And so they are getting kind of a warped view of what reality is. And so we have to be helping them put this puzzle together, because one day there's a book I'm working on doubt, that there's something called transitional doubt. If you want to think of someone who's been putting together a puzzle and all of a sudden their table gets bumped and all the pieces go flying everywhere, and they have to start putting everything back together again. So this would like kids that go off to college will see that. New marriages, maybe a death in the family, maybe a divorce, lots of different things that can just absolutely wreck your puzzle. And unless we know how it kind of fit together the first place, or if we had adults that just kind of put it together for us, kids don't know how to put it together for themselves later. So anyway, we have all those different things of just knowing which puzzle pieces actually belong to the correct puzzle box. What does ultimate reality look like? And is there a competing reality, which I would say we have going on right now, which again goes back to the concept of authority. Who's the authority?
I love what you say. You say your children's grip on Christianity will only be as strong as their confidence in the truth. So to disciple our kids in the biblical worldview, they first need to know God's original design. And that's what's getting confused right now. So let's move to the sex talk has changed, right? And now we are in a world where, as you said earlier, love and tolerance and inclusion, that promotes gender confusion and sexual confusion. You have more Gen Zers, so 13 to 27, identifying as LGBTQ, I think twice as many as a previous generation. Whether or not that's, part of all social media and experimentation. I mean, it's so confusing.
A lot of things happened in 2007, right when the smartphone was introduced, that, just catapulted so many different things. But you're right on that.
So the LGBTQ culture and kids and social media. I was talking to some a youth pastor and a guy who works on parachurch, and I said, if you went into the school and said, okay, how many of you believe LGBTQ community is fine? Now, you're not involved in it, but you believe it's fine. He said 80% of the kids would raise their hand. That was a public school. Our youth guy said probably about 50%, in the church would raise their hand. And so we have a lot of work to do. So we have the sex talk. We've got it in a biblical framework. We need a biblical worldview. And now we have all the dump of the other puzzle pieces in there that's just making things really confusing and going back to good words like love and tolerance, not in a good sense, right? We want to carry each other's burden. Scripture talks about that, but we're not talking about tolerance of something the Bible says is wrong. And then inclusion. We want to be able to include others in the community of the church, and yet inclusion has taken on another word, another meaning altogether. So how can we separate this? How do we do the sex talk within this confused culture that we're in?
Yeah. So one of the things I encourage parents to do, and we actually have this in the study guide, we don't have it in the sexuality book, is preparing kids to know the difference between being made in the image of God and reflecting the image of God. So there's kind of like this progression that I say for, people say, how do I prepare my child for, when their uncle comes home and he's gay, or their uncle comes home and now he's their aunt? How do I prepare my kids for this? And so one of the things I say is just really establishing this concept of Imago Dei, the image of God. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? Who is made in the image of God? And that can start really young, where you just identify humans, all humans. It doesn't matter if they're dressed like a clown. It doesn't matter if they are schizophrenic and homeless. It doesn't matter if they are behind bars for a serial killer. It doesn't matter. All humans are created in the image of God. And how do we treat them, or how do we view them? That they are worthy and they're important. That the Lord sees our souls as so important and worthwhile and of value. So valuable, important. Okay, now we're going to move on to the idea of what about things that reflect God's image? We can maybe start small with things that are obvious. Maybe that guy who's a serial killer, was he reflecting God's image? No, because God is the one who values life. So no, he was not reflecting God's image. Or what about when you hit your little brother? Was that reflecting God's image? No, that wasn't reflecting God's image. What about when mommy or daddy lost their cool and yelled really loudly? Was that reflecting God's image? No. And so we're introducing them to this idea that we all fail in reflecting the image of God. We don't have to call it sin necessarily. We just that we're failing in reflecting that image, even though we're made in the image of God and still equally important and still equally valuable. We do things that do not reflect that image. And then we can move into, once they start being introduced to some of these other sexualities and other different identities, is this reflecting God's image? Because it said, God said, let us make mankind in his image. So male and female, he created them in the image of God. He created them. That we don't have this panoply of all these different genders. One of the things that if I were to add to the end of the book, the things to say to your kids until they want to gag, is that your style, your personality, and your interests can exist on a spectrum, but your gender does not. And so we just have, this is part of being made in the image of God, and is reflected in that male and female, but we can choose to do things that don't reflect that image. And we find ways that we ourselves don't, that they don't. Everybody's put kind of on equal footing. And so it keeps things simple in that sense of what was intended versus what deviates from what God intended. And we don't have to make it like this sin is worse than that one and all the different things that maybe the Christian church has been guilty of in the past, which I go through in the same-sex attraction chapter, where we've always kind of had this safe haven of the unpardonable sin. And it just keeps moving the goalposts, because as long as we can feel like we haven't committed the unpardonable sin, then, then we're still okay. So just, it prevents us from doing hypocritical things like that.
So some things in Scripture that we don't want to participate in, we know that, adultery is wrong. We know that sex before marriage is wrong. And people still may participate in those things, but there's an aspect that we're not going to argue that you shouldn't do that, right? Mm-hmm. In same-sex attraction, the LGBTQ community, the sexuality becomes an identity. So if you say what you're doing is wrong, or what you're doing is sin, or doesn't reflect God's glory, His image, mm-hmm. Then they come back and say, well, wait a minute, that's me. You just rejected me. So how do you have that conversation? How do we help our kids understand the difference between identity and sexuality?
Yeah, and this is one of those things that, as I was studying, that I think is really probably one of the biggest problems that we have right now, is the fact that I call this either ideological Stockholm syndrome or spiritual Stockholm syndrome. It's this idea. So Stockholm syndrome itself is when someone has been taken captive by someone else, but they start to identify so much with the captive that when someone comes and tries to free them, they'll actually fight against, the police or the FBI or whoever is trying to free them from this captivity. They will fight against them because they've grown to identify so much with their captors. So we talk about the difference between captives and rebels, and how so much within the sexual mindset of the LGBTQ plus, we don't have a lot of rebels. We have, some of them might be, but we have a lot of people who are captive to this ideology. And so you have to be able to separate them enough, their humanity, from the captive, or the captor, which is the ideology, in order for them to see, I'm not aiming at you, I am aiming at this ideology. And this can sometimes, I think, be one of the areas that science is on our side, that we look at things. We'll just go even to a broader sense of like family, an intact nuclear family with a mother and a father and kids. They have found that one of the largest contributors to kids' academic achievement isn't necessarily in how much money is put into the school or their socioeconomic status of the students. An intact family is actually one of the things that predicts academic achievement. So this is what we would expect if God had made a model for us, maybe on family, which consists of a particular type of sexuality of the mother and father with their kids. Now, there can be other examples. For example, I looked up, and this didn't make it into the book. I hope to, maybe if we do like an update on this, to put this in there. I looked to see which country was the most affirming of LGBTQ plus identities. And I believe it was like number one was Norway. So then I specifically took my research to what are the studies in Norway finding. And one of the things that they found in Norway is like, how often have you heard people say, we have to affirm this identity or else this person's going to commit suicide? Well, what they did is they looked at suicidal ideation. They compared it with people who identified as heterosexual, cisgender, people who were same-sex attracted, but maybe not in a relationship or had never actually acted upon it. And then again, back to the people who were heterosexual and in a sexual relationship. And then people who were LGBTQ plus identifying and in a sexual relationship. And what they found was that the suicidality rate went up. But so like the person who identified as LGBTQ plus was actually more at risk for suicide. Even if they hadn't participated in any sexual activity, they were more at risk for suicidality than the person who didn't. However, and this takes it back to us all being equal at the foot of the cross, the people who were heterosexual who participated in sex outside of marriage had a higher risk of suicidality than the ones who actually had not participated but had an LGBT identity. And then the final group, the ones that were LGBT identified and in a sexual relationship, their suicidality was off the charts in comparison to all the other ones. And this was within a society that is known to be the most affirming society ever. So we have to come to a conclusion that either it's not this concept of affirmation, but maybe there's something within going outside of how you were created that actually is causing people not to flourish. And again, I would say this goes back to being able to do science well. You have to be able to look at how the studies were done. How many people did they leave out? So like things with like kids that are transitioning, they'll say, well, most people don't regret it. Well, they don't tell you that in this study, either it was like 12 people in the study, which you can't make a general thing from 12 people, or especially the only 12 people who responded were all the ones that were happy. And there's actually 400 other people who didn't respond that you don't know if how they felt about their transition. Really good science, I think reality will always back up what God has said and how he has designed the world. And so that's just one of the things that I think we can sometimes punt to if they won't listen to us because God said so. Well, let's look at the studies. What happens in reality? And does that reflect God's reality, God's box top, or does it reflect the reality that we think we can do whatever we want with our bodies and still flourish just as much?
Talk to parents who have some younger children. So let's say preschool. The sex talk doesn't start in the teenage years, right? From the very beginning. So give us some guidance on sex talk at some different stages of a child's life.
So this would be, again, kind of what I was talking about before of how do you establish the correct categories? And so we're going to be establishing the category of things that are so powerful that they need to be guarded, things that are so valuable that they need to be protected, things that can be good or bad depending on how they're used or depending on if they're in the right situation or the wrong situation. We can start with those categories. And then we can also start with the idea of humans being made in the image of God and humans choosing actions that do not reflect God's image. All of these things are things they need to understand before we can even go into the sexuality issues. And so that's where we can talk about, this person was created male or created female. And how much more freeing is it to be comfortable in your own body as opposed to having to go through all these different changes? They may know kids that are transitioning. We just need to be establishing these categories early on. And then, of course, the category of things that you do that are physical representations of promises made in the spiritual realm. But also when it comes to it, you need to be asking what they know already, because people would love to wait till, the kids are in 5th grade to start having these conversations. That is way too late. And the reason why it's way too late is because the world has started discipling our kids as early as they can. We've got literally books called the Gay BCs out there that have a different type of identity for each one of the ABCs. A is for agender, B is for bisexual, C is for cisgender. They are actively discipling our kids. And I just kind of want to remind parents that there's an overall principle, which I'm sure it has a psychological name. I'm not sure exactly what it is called, but I know so many psychologists who affirm, they say, yes, this is absolutely true. So I've just started calling it the founder's effect. I don't know what it's actually called, but it's the concept of whoever teaches you about something first immediately becomes the expert in your mind. So who do you want to be the expert? Do you want that to be you, your kids' friends, Dr. Google, the school? Like, you want the expert to be you. And even though you don't want to start introducing them to things that they are way too young for, you need to start asking, what have they noticed? What are their friends saying about things? I have so many mama bears that come to me and say, we were watching this show and then this happened and all of a sudden we had to have a conversation about bisexuality and I never expected to. That stuff is constantly happening. And if you are too busy, you will miss it. So we need to make sure, as my old pastor's wife used to say, I don't want my kids hearing anything that they haven't heard in my kitchen first. That needs to be our mantra on this. And that we are also, as Katie Faust says, another friend of mine who wrote an amazing book called Them Before Us, we need to, oh golly, what does she call it? It's like the concept of unflappable, but it's like basically your face. You can't react with your face. You have to look unshockable all the time, so that when they bring something up, you're not like, oh my gosh, that's like, how did you hear about that? Because they're never going to come to you again. You have to have that straight face and be like, okay, we can talk about that. You may need to step out to your room and go call your sister and be like, oh my gosh, she's asking about this. What do I do? You can freak out in private, but you cannot freak out in front of them, because they will never come to you anymore, because they see, oh, that really upset mom. That really upset dad. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. We need to be the experts, and we need to be unflappable.
So you have an acronym,
Yes.
ROAR, that helps parents. Again, Mama Bear is for moms and dads as well.
Yeah.
But kind of is a little framework to kind of think through. So go, if you would, go through ROAR real quick for us.
Yeah, so ROAR is the acronym that we picked for the first. If you're trying to dissect an idea with your kids, you start out with recognizing the message. Like, what is the message that if the people with this alternate ideology were trying to explain it to you in a way that makes sense, what were some of the statements that they would make? So first off, we have to be able to recognize the message correctly, because when we get to the next step, which is offer discernment, and I'd like to add offer objective discernment, we have to make sure that we're basically recognizing the message correctly. When we go to, so it's recognize the message, offer discernment, argue for a healthier approach, and then reinforce these ideas with your kids. So once we understand what is being taught, then we go to the offer discernment. And I have kind of like a little hand thing that I do with parents a lot of times, that we say most ideas are going to be this mixture of good and bad, or lies and truth. We need to separate the good from the bad, accept the good, reject the bad. Again, they're always going to mixture, separate the biblical from the unbiblical, accept the biblical, reject the unbiblical. And what that's teaching them is to constantly be looking for areas of agreement, always be looking for the partial truths that these lies are wrapped in. Because what you'll find a lot of times is that if you don't discern the lies and the truth, you end up rejecting something that's true, or you end up affirming something that's false. And once your kids feel like you have rejected something that's true, you have lost your credibility to them. They say mom and dad do not see reality. They don't say truth. They're just, they have this, Bible thing, and that's all that they can see. And so I'm not going to talk to them about this anymore, because they don't know what I see. They don't see what I see. So we're accepting the good, rejecting the bad. But what we want to do for argue for a healthier approach is take that good that we found and show how the Bible actually addresses this. So that one of the good things that you might have would be, we recognize that people are hurting, like within the LGBT stuff. Okay, let's recognize some of the real things. Okay, this demographic is in a lot more pain, and that can be shown without a doubt through lots and lots and lots of sociological studies, that the cases of anxiety and depression and other comorbid always sounds so horrible because it's got the word morbid in it. It just means that these different disorders are all kind of all present at the same time. It's co-occurring morbidities. That we have a broken and hurting, vulnerable population here that we need to be very, very careful with. Now, that's the truth that we have said. Now, the solution, the thing we're going to reject, is that affirming this identity is going to be what leads to their best interest and what leads them to flourish. Those are two separate ideas. I don't say, well, we reject everything of what they're doing without acknowledging the hurting people. And we don't say, come here, boo, let me accept everything about you because you're hurting, because now I've basically embraced a lie. We have to separate those two. We argue for how do we treat people. Let's look at how the body was created. We go through this in the porn section, which we won't go through here in this interview, of how the body was created to bond with other humans through chemicals that are released through the sexual process. Is this something that we want to be happening to people in the wrong way or at the wrong time? So we're arguing for a healthier approach, and then we're reinforcing this ideas with our kids every time that we have the opportunity to talk about this. And you've got Pride Month coming up, so lots of opportunity to be talking about maybe some of the statements that you see, like follow your heart and love is love. And Mama Bear Apologetics has a really great article on maybe some of these statements, how to break it down with your kids. that you're constantly talking about this, that R, that final R, after we recognize the message, offer objective discernment, argue for a healthier approach, that's when the discipling happens, when we reinforce this idea through discussion, discipleship, and prayer.
So roar, recognizing the message, offer discernment, argue for a healthier approach, and the R, reinforce through discussion, discipleship. I love the aspect of discussion, because if there's anything we're learning about Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, it's they don't want to be told, no, that's not right. Let's have a discussion about that.
Let's have a discussion.
Let's talk through it. Mm-hmm. This starts back in the beginning with God, and let's just build this framework and this worldview. Okay, last thing. So in your afterword of your book, you have things to repeat to your kids until they want to gag. I love the title of that chapter, Afterward. And you have 17 things there. Now, we won't go through over all 17, but pick your top 3 and drill down on things to repeat to your kids until they want to gag.
I would say those top 3 we've kind of talked about a little bit. The first 2, I think we need to be saying to kids as soon as they can understand language, and that is what you do with your body matters. Because think about how many different ideologies this undercuts right now. The idea that what you do with your body matters. And of course, as every parent knows, what's the second question that will always come out of a kid's mouth whenever you say this one statement? Why? Why? That's like, kids just love to ask why. They want to understand why. What you do with your body matters. Well, why? We don't say that our bodies are a gift from God, because unfortunately your kids have seen you re-gift gifts before, have they not? Or they've seen you throw gifts away, or they've seen you, there's just a lot of things that happen with gifts. So we don't want to give the concept of ownership necessarily. We want to give the concept of stewardship. Stewardship is very much more a biblical concept than ownership. So what you do with your body matters. Why? Because God gave you your body to take care of it. So our bodies matter, and it's our job to take care of it. This will go from everything from brushing your teeth to eating your vegetables, to going to PE class, to reading to improve your mind, to going to school, to everything, not eating too much sugar, everything you could possibly think of. You can break it down to this: what you do with your body matters. Why? Because God gave you your body to take care of it. And then the final one, I would say, sex is a marital couple repeating their vows in bodily form. We need to drill that into them so much that the purpose of sex is basically that covenant renewal ceremony, so that the second that they start thinking, I want to be with this person, they're like, well, I'm not repeating my marital vows, so I can't really do that. That it's something that it's nonsensical, doesn't make sense. And they don't have this idea of like, I just need to stop. They know that they're looking forward to repeating those marital vows, that it's a good thing. It's something that God created. And they're also listening. It's like you're taking them to weddings. They're also going to be listening to the things that people vow. I think that if married adults would see sex as repeating their marital vows, there's a lot of things that happen, we're going to say, between consenting adults that you would never put in a speech on your wedding day for how you want to treat them. Everything on the wedding day is about that unconditional love and that unconditional acceptance, and always looking for that other person's best, and always trying to bring that relationship together, and always giving deference to this person above anybody else. If we had that concept of that love and that cherish and that intimacy built into this is what we're trying to reinforce, I think there's a lot of people who might even what they do within the marital bed might be different, and to probably their benefit, to change it back to something that would be reflected in the marital vows. So those would be my 3.
Hillary, that's great stuff. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your ministry. Mama Bear Apologetics, empowering your kids to challenge culture lies. Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality, a new book, Honest Prayers for Mama Bears. And then you guys have all kinds of resources and podcasts. Tell us where they can find all that on your website.
Absolutely. So first off, Mama is spelled M-A-M-A. We get all sorts of wacky spellings of Mama, so just go with the simple one, M-A-M-A, Mama Bear Apologetics. And so we have podcasts, we have interviews, we have resources. So like things like, the Guide to Easter or the Guide to Halloween, things where there's a lot of Christians who disagree with stuff on Halloween, or there's a lot of skeptics, our Guide to Christmas, that talk about, this was originally a pagan holiday and this means all these different things. So we've got these free resources for you. We've got the Busy Mom's Guide to Apologetics, just kind of understanding what apologetics is. And then a lot of times we're just kind of looking at what's going on in culture and saying, how can we interact with that? How can we roar through that? Maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a commercial, maybe it's, whatever is kind of going on in culture. Maybe it's looking at yoga. That was one of our recent series that we did. So grab the books, grab the study guides to the books, especially the study guide to the sexuality book. We have so much new information in the study guide that we could not fit, because word count is an oppressive mistress, I like to say, for when you are writing books. You can't say all the things you want to say. So we had to put some of that in the study guide. So both those study guides. And then if you're feeling just exhausted, get your Honest Prayers book, because we've got a whole section for when I just can't even, for when you're just feeling so exhausted. There's just too many things. How can you cry out to God? So I hope that our resources are just empowering parents to really understand what's going on. We say over and over again, the sexuality book, it's really hard to basically refute something if you don't understand it. So our first goal is to basically understand what's going on, and then we can start to teach our kids how to refute it. So yeah, that's where you can find us, all the places.
Great stuff. Mama Bear Apologetics.com.
Yep.
Mama Bear Apologetics.com. Hillary, I'm going to ask you one more thing. Would you pray for parents out there? Some of them hear this and they say, man, I blew it. I waited too long. I've delegated something that I should have done. And then you got divorced and blended families and single parents. And I mean, there's so many challenges regarding the conversations we've talked about today. So if you would pray for us, I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Oh, Father God, we thank you so much for this conversation. I thank you so much for just the way you have guided us through your word, Lord, to know how we are created, who we were created by, how we were created to function, how families were created to function, Lord, that you didn't just leave us here to figure everything out, Lord. And at the same time, I know that there are some times that we have strayed from your ideal. God, I pray that as we have strayed from your ideal in certain situations, Lord, that we would not use that to heap condemnation upon ourselves, Lord, that we would remember that Satan's voice is the voice of condemnation. Your voice is the voice of conviction, and your kindness leads to repentance, Father God. I pray for the mama bears and papa bears who feel like either they've waited too long or they did not give their children a good example, Lord, that as long as they are breathing, and as long as their kids are breathing, there is still time. There is still hope, Lord, that your arm will never be too short to save, and that your kindness just, Lord, I pray that we would understand our problem isn't our sexuality. It's that we do not understand your goodness fully, Lord, and there is no age limit to being able to understand your goodness. Father God, I just pray for the release of any kind of judgmental voice in their head saying that don't even try, Lord, and that as long as we are walking on this earth, we are going to be walking towards you, and we will be taking our calling to shepherd those who you have put within our sphere of influence. We would take that seriously. And that at the same time, we would do what is in our power to do, and we would release it to you, Lord, knowing that we will always be imperfect. You, God, were the perfect father, and your first two, Adam and Eve, Lord, you were 0 for 2 in terms of obedience. And if we expect to be better parents than you, it's just not possible, Lord. So I just pray for that, release that sense of freedom, but also just a fire under the seat of those who maybe feel like they have not taken this responsibility seriously enough. We thank you, God, that you are the God of second, third, fourth, fifth chances, Lord, that if we read through your scripture, man, the Old Testament is just a story of things going wrong over and over again, and the way you bring redemption throughout all those situations, God. We thank you so much for your word. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Hillary, thanks so much. Really, really appreciate it. Great, great stuff.
Thank you.
One of the things Hillary drives home in her books and in this conversation is that parents have the responsibility to disciple their children. I mean, that's one responsibility we cannot delegate. So a couple things that I'd like for you to know about. First, check out our website, ronmoore.org, for dates for marriage enrichment opportunities that you can join digitally. We'd love for you to join us digitally. Parents, we have to have strong marriages. Also, moms and dads need to be grounded in their faith in order to disciple They're kids. You can't impart what you don't possess. So be sure to get our personal study to help you understand the essential truths of the Christian faith. It's called Living Grounded, and you can get it right on Amazon. It'll help you prepare yourself to prepare your children to grow spiritually. Be sure to follow the Journey with Ron Moore podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and share this episode with a friend. This helps us help others to develop godly moms and dads. Hey, thanks so much for joining us on the journey.